So, as if the opening ceremonies of the Olympics were not bad enough with the mockery of the Last Supper and then the gaslighting that followed it of, oh, it's not all about you Christians. That's just some reenactment of some old Greek festival. When the producers of the actual opening ceremonies admitted the director did take his inspiration from the Last Supper. So aside from all the gaslighting and craziness of the opening ceremonies, things have gotten a little bit more interesting with headlines of two athletes, one from Algeria, one from Taiwan, apparently males competing against women in boxing. In fact, even defeating one of the Italian boxers, and I guess less than 50 seconds, the woman just surrendered. Look, I've had enough of this. I've never been punched this way in my life before. Did this actually happen? Is this going on? Well, today in the Lust is Boring podcast, we're going to kind of pivot from sexuality as something you do, as an activity, to sexuality as something that we are, our identity. So what's really going on here? Do we have biological males beating up women in sports? Are we going to award guys now for punching women? Well, the original story came out as that. We've got a couple guys in there, identify as females, they're beating up women. News stories and information seems to be coming out that neither of these athletes apparently identify as trans. Original stories I read that both were actually born male, raised male. The Taiwanese fighter apparently is a woman who started boxing at the age of 13 to protect her own mom from domestic violence. So born, raised, passports, female. So what's going on here? Are these people biological males, females? I think the truth is going to come up to the surface, but what I want to present today is the case for and against this. Okay, well, what if they are females with higher levels of testosterone? Can you have a female with XY chromosomes? Or what if it's a man who claims to be a woman competing in women's sports? How do we answer all these things, regardless of the way the facts are going to roll out? Well, one thing we need to keep in mind is when it comes to the Middle East, this might be a surprise to some people, but Iran, for example, has the highest rates in the world of gender reassignment surgeries. That might come as a surprise to some because they think, well, isn't that a Muslim country? Don't they tend to be a little bit more conservative with values? Not the case. In many Middle Eastern countries, identifying as homosexual is punishable by death or imprisonment. And so in order to avoid that penalty, you have countless numbers of people undergoing these gender reassignment surgeries. There was one activist that said, you know what it really is? He said it's gay conversion therapy on steroids, literally. And so in many Middle Eastern countries, you've got males who, in order to save their own lives, if they wish to identify as homosexual, having to transition, biologically speaking, to take on the secondary sex characteristics of the other sex. And then it's acceptable to engage in a relationship with another man if you're identifying as a woman. And so that's a helpful kind of historical piece to keep in mind of what's going on in the Middle East. Now, the question of XY chromosomes. If you have XY chromosomes, are you automatically a man? A lot of people believe that this is the case. It's either XX or XY, and that's all there is to it. Scientifically, this is not true. Now, having a Y chromosome does not necessarily determine male identity. I mean, usually it does. The gene that typically does that is called the SRY gene. It's called the sex-determining region on the Y chromosome. But sometimes a person can actually have XY chromosomes, an SRY gene, but still not develop as a male. The example that we'd look at here is called CAIS. It's complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. Now, women who have this have a variation in the receptor for androgen in their body. And so her body won't respond to testosterone in the typical manner. It's almost just rarely identified at birth because such babies appear totally fully female on the outside. What will often happen is that puberty comes and the young girl doesn't menstruate. This often leads to the detection of CIIS because the doctors will discover that this girl actually lacks a uterus and ovaries. Instead, she has internal undescended testes that can't actually produce viable sperm, but will produce hormone levels typical of a man. But what's interesting, her body will convert the hormones into estrogen so that she develops typical female secondary sex characteristics. Now, this is a rare condition, but these women are still women. Now, Is this the case with these Olympians? I don't know. I don't have that much information whether or not they have this disorder of sexual development, but it does create a kind of challenging situation, right? Does this woman have elevated levels of testosterone because of nature or because of some performance enhancing drug? Well, that's what they need to figure out. Now, what about if it is a biological male, though, who is identifying as female? Well, what if they take some, testosterone suppressing drugs, some estrogen, then is it fair for them to compete in sports if we just kind of whack down those levels of testosterone? Why is that not fair? Well, here's why it's not fair. In combat sports like mixed martial arts, you'll often have up to a dozen different weight classes, ranging from strawweight to super heavyweight. The day before the opponents face each other in the octagon, they got to weigh in. Now, if they miss weight by even 1 pound, they can be disqualified. In the case of like a championship bout, it's a half a pound that will basically disqualify you from winning the belt. And so to maintain the integrity of the sport, if a 265-pound fighter weighs in at 265 pounds and 9 ounces, he's ineligible to win the belt. That's how important it is that we have a level playing field. It's the same thing with equipment, gloves. If you got one fighter who's got like 16-ounce gloves, the other guy's got 12-ounce gloves, it's not fair. This guy's got an advantage. He's got heavier gloves. Baseball bat. You'll notice in the majors, you can't use composite bats, aluminum, titanium bats. You got to use the wood. But imagine if you eliminated all distinctions in athletes. Yeah, no weight, no age, no sex, nothing. I think you would definitely end up with a clear champion, right? But what would that actually look like? What would that do to the integrity of the sports? In sports, there's no psychological identity or belief that overrides your weight, your height, your age, whatever. I remember I had a son, and Michael, and he was in the minors in, Little League Baseball, and he's quite an athlete and made it to the all-star team for the major division. And so these are the kids that get to go on to play in the Little League World Series if they do well enough, win the competitions. I could not believe the level of documentation required to allow him to participate. Okay, we want his birth certificate, social security, not copies. We need originals. We need this. We need that. It was just nuts to play a baseball game because they wanted to make sure there weren't any coaches fudging, about the ages of their athletes. And so it's got to be a level playing field. I mean, think about swimming. If you're using the wrong swimsuit fabric, it's considered illegal. That's not fair. That fabric is faster than that fabric. It's an unfair advantage. And same thing. Look, weight is an advantage. Age is an advantage. Fabric. But what about sex? Does that actually give you an advantage? Do men actually have a biological advantage over women if you just lower the testosterone? There is absolutely a male advantage, and here it is. Before puberty, boys and girls typically have about the same level of testosterone. Athleticism, you'll often see kids on the playground, fourth grade girls keeping up with the fourth grade boys in the soccer games. Something starts to shift, though, with puberty. With puberty, boys have 10 to 15 times as much testosterone than women do as puberty progresses. Now, what is the effect of that when you combine that with male genetics? Well, for one, muscle. Men will typically develop 36% more muscle mass than women. Grip strength. You know that 95% of men produce a grip strength that is greater than 90% of females. Like, this is a big difference, and it creates a big problem when you've got groups like USA Powerlifting losing lawsuits that are now mandating that they allow men who identify as women to compete in women's powerlifting division. I mean, do you know what this means? This means, and I went ahead and I looked it up, who would be the world champion right now in my age class among women in the deadlift and bench press? It would be me. I would have the world record in both of those lifts if I simply identified as a woman in my age and weight class. I mean, this is absurd. I mean, yeah, I can lift 415 pounds. The most I've ever benched was 285. Is that impressive if I identify as a woman, perhaps? But for guys, like, that's nothing. Like the world record deadlift for men is like over 1,000 pounds. And so our grips are incredibly different. The ligaments, do you know that men actually have greater ligament strength? Explains why women are 5 times as likely to rupture their ACL as guys are. I mean, I speak at a lot of high schools for a living, And you walk down the hallway and like, there's a girl with a brace on her knee. Look, another girl with a brace on her knee. Look, another girl with a brace on her knee. Yeah, these are the field hockey girls or whatever. Soccer, 5 times as likely to rupture the ACL because the difference in the ligament strength. Bones. Between men and women, our bones are shaped differently. They articulate differently. Because of how the female pelvis will change during puberty, it'll reduce her joint rotation and then makes them begin to be slower than the males. And this is before to after puberty. Now, men have a higher center of gravity, which helps in jumping. You could even see this, do a little wall exercise. If you're a guy and girl, stand up against a wall, back, butt, heels, everything against the wall, lean over. The girl can typically touch her toes. The guy just face plants. It's because we have a different center of gravity. The guy's is higher. In our bones, men have greater bone density than women, which makes the bones stronger. There's a greater surface area to the bones, which accommodates more skeletal muscle. Cardiovascular. There's 3 things that will enhance oxygen delivery to the body: your lungs, your heart, and the hemoglobin levels in your blood. Now, lungs. Men have a lower diaphragm placement in our body, which gives us a greater lung capacity. Our heart. We have a larger heart than women do. The left ventricle of the heart is the chamber, kind of the reservoir from which blood is pumped to the body. The more blood that it can hold, the more it can deliver with every heartbeat. Now, because the female's heart is smaller than a man's, she pumps 33% less blood per heartbeat. Also, the guy's got a greater hemoglobin level and thus a greater ability to transport oxygen in the blood, which enhances his aerobic activity. So what is the net result of these differences? And I've just hit on the tip of the iceberg of them. Here's what ends up happening. 2017, nearly 800 high school boys beat the women's world record in the 100-meter sprint. These are high school boys. The women's world record 400-meter race is beaten by about 15,000 boys per year by men and boys. So when it comes to allowing men to compete in women's sports, some athletic organizations have made attempts to kind of level the playing field. Some have ruled that men who are transitioning need to take testosterone suppressing drugs so that you kind of keep that testosterone level under 10 nanomoles per liter for about a year. And then you can compete. Okay, for a lot of people, that the number means nothing. Okay, what's an nanomole? Okay, keep that number in mind. Okay, they want the guys' level of testosterone to be at or below 10 nanomoles per liter of blood. Okay, keep that number in mind, 10. How much does a woman have in her blood? 0.5 to 2.4, which means 10 nanomoles per liter of blood of testosterone is 4 to 5 times higher than the testosterone levels of elite female athletes and 20 times as high as some females. And this is the level they're saying that now it's even. Now, it's not that these levels even stay in one place. Testosterone levels fluctuate. Before you compete, the man's testosterone level will spike in a manner that's more pronounced than female athletes. It's interesting. You can just look at testosterone levels in a guy after a competition, and you can tell if he won or he lost. Because if he wins, testosterone goes up. He loses, testosterone goes down. And these peaks and valleys are more accentuated in males than in females. Now, if you simply suppress testosterone in a guy, it doesn't reduce his bone size, the structure, the articulation of the joints. It does not decrease his lung or his heart size. It doesn't even significantly reverse muscle mass in a guy. Even after a year of going on testosterone suppression, the typical male athlete only loses 5% of his strength. In fact, if a man is taking estradiol, which is a synthetic estrogen to transition to a female presentation, this will actually increase muscle mass, giving him yet more of an advantage. So if it were just about testosterone levels, you know what would happen? Then women could take it and just compete in the NFL, take over mixed martial arts, arm wrestling competitions, just give her enough testosterone, it's all going to be evil. That's not happening because you can't just give a woman testosterone and then it just levels out all of the biological advantages of developing as a male through puberty. It isn't happening. Now, look, women, no one's going to doubt this, are capable of just extraordinary athletic feats, but they can't display their talents if they're being beaten by average male athletes. I mean, no one's going to devalue the career of some like undefeated boxer because he never fought an opponent who weighed more than 10 pounds than he did. Obviously, I would say, look, this is a really controversial topic, and I'm glad that more people are speaking up about it. I remember seeing a swim team recently on the collegiate level where there was a guy, a biological male, that wanted to identify as female being on the team, and the girls' team were like, nope, we're not going to happen. We're not even going to get in the pool, let alone the locker room with that guy. If you, university, want to have your women's swim team comprised of one guy who thinks he's a girl, go for it. We're not getting on the team bus. And so more women need to speak up about this. It's not about being transphobic and hating other individuals. And so I think this whole debate is often framed around the subject of trans athletes, but this isn't the real issue. The issue is men competing in women's sports. And it's not that people who experience gender dysphoria can't play sports, but I mean, to be fair, during competition, athletes are not competing against like the internal sense of identity of the other person. You're competing against the other person's body. Therefore, what I would propose, in the spirit of true sportsmanship, you have to admit that at least in the world of athletics, being female matters more than feeling female. And so this whole mess that's going on in our culture right now, to me, it's almost like a math problem. And I think of it like when I help my kids with math at the end of the day, we're sitting around the table and I'm helping my, fifth grade daughter with her math problem, and she's got some long division equation. And I'll look and, she's got the answer wrong. I'm like, okay, well, let's see where you went wrong here. Hey, and then I get out the phone. Hey, Siri, how do you solve this fifth grade math problem? I'm like, oh, yeah, well, that's an integer there. And look, here's where you went wrong. You missed one digit at the top of the equation just by one number. And because that one number was off at the beginning, the error that flowed from that was compounded exponentially. And so in the same respect, if we don't know how to distinguish male from female, then the error that will flow from that is compounded exponentially. I think of it as kind of what Vatican II said. Vatican II said, when God is forgotten, the creature itself grows unintelligible. In other words, if we lose sight as a culture of supernatural realities, it'll come to the inevitable point that we can't even see natural realities like male and female. And so all these new identity labels that we're hearing about gender, are these things actually bringing us closer to the deepest truth of our identity? Are they actually giving us permission to reject it? And this is why I would propose, if this stuff is actually true and you've got guys competing in combat sports against women, beating them up and winning prize money or medals, to me, it's almost like this is proof positive that feminism has cannibalized itself. And original feminism had this good intent. Okay, women should be able to own property and vote and all that stuff. But then it became it just exacerbated the point of that men and women are the same. There are no differences whatsoever. We have to eliminate sexual distinctions in order to have equality. And to me, this was the beginning of the mistake. It's almost like a snake kind of swallowing its tail, and then it keeps ingesting that, and then it gets all the way around back to its head, and it isn't quite sure what to do with itself. And I think, what do you do with yourself at that point? You have to vomit the whole thing out because it was wrong from the get-go. Male and female are not opposites, so to speak. They're complementary creations. And so if you do want to learn more about this stuff, deeper into the biology, things like disorders of sexual development, what about intersex conditions? What does the church teach on those things? Is it possible to have a trans brain? These are big questions. They deserve deep consideration. We're actually about to release a course at chastity.com. It's called chastity.com/gender is the link. And it's going to be a whole course diving into these tough topics. How do we address these things with compassion, with clarity, with precision, instead of just taking a hot take out of the gate when we may be wrong? Let's learn to listen, to understand the complexity of some of these issues. If you're interested in that, you can pre-register for the course. Just go to chastity.com/gender, sign up. It's going to be about 10 classes long, 15 to 20 minutes long, deep dive that you could use with high school students, college students, yourself, to learn the church's teachings on this whole delicate subject. And if you also want to support the work we're doing in this podcast, please consider joining our Patreon community. You just go to patreon.com/Jason Everett, and then you can sign up there and support the work we're doing, and hopefully spread those to as many people as possible and support our family in the meantime. So God bless. I hope this episode has been helpful, and we'll see you next week.